Welcome, everyone, to the very first episode of In the Net. I'm your host, Chance Williams, with Preston Broderick and Sarah Ford today. We have a special guest who will help us answer the most searched questions about faith. Joining us is the one and only Kevin Dugay. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you for having me.
Yay, Kevin.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Appreciate you coming in for time.
Of course.
So now to kick things off, Kevin, could you share a bit about your journey and what led you to become a pastor at MacU?
Yeah. So it would probably surprise a lot of people that I was not always a Christian. I grew up in an extremely non-religious, non-spiritual part of the country. Grew up in North Jersey, right outside of Manhattan. And spiritual life is just not really a huge topic like it would be in the Midwest, where, in Oklahoma City. And basically, I tried to keep it brief. When I was 11 years old or 10 years old, I wanted to be an actor because I thought it was really cool to see people, on TV do all that stuff. Because I was too young for Drake and Josh.
Not at all.
So Drake
Not
and
at
Josh,
all.
that was my favorite show. And I wanted to do that. And I told my mom, I said, I want to do that. I want to be on TV. I want to act. It looks so fun. My mom was like, okay, whatever. After a while, she's like, okay, Kevin wants to try this. She put me in like a musical theater acting class. And how that works is like they teach you how to do this, but you also put on a show at the same time. And so you audition. And I've never done this. Most of these kids have been doing it for years. I'm brand new, not really ever sing or act or anything. And I become the lead of this show as like the first time doing it. And my parents like, oh, well, Kevin might be good at this. And this is in New York. And I get invited to sing with these Broadway stars in this same kind of thing. And so my parents are kind of seeing like Kevin might actually be good at performing arts. And when I was 13 years old, I signed with my first agent for film and television. And then this started this really very serious, very intense, very passionate acting career for from the age I was 10 years old to 22 years old. And there were many days where I left school to film commercials and episodes of TV shows. And when I started to get into my late teens, early 20s, I lived in Los Angeles for a while, and there I got connected to a really wonderful manager and agent in the East Coast. So I moved back, signed with them. Now I start to get called in by these big casting offices, these big production offices to audition for, really, really big projects. And they're starting to know who I am. And, for me, acting wasn't like, oh, I like to do it. Maybe someday, I might make it. A lot of producers, a lot of casting directors, a lot of acting coaches would say, for Kevin Dugay, it wasn't really about if, but when. And so this was my life. Put everything into it. How I worked out. I went to so many acting classes every Saturday and made so many connections, how I ate, my skincare routine. It was so serious for me. And Instagram was a way to connect with people with my career and my music. So I posted a lot of covers on there as a musician, a singer. And I followed this electric guitarist, and I commented on one of the videos. And a girl saw my comment because she also followed this guitarist and said, who would name their Instagram handle Spicy Kevin Roll? That used to be my Instagram page, Spicy Kevin Roll. And she looked.
Find that.
Yeah, no, you can't find it anymore. But she took a look at my page. Was like, oh my gosh, this guy is so into himself. He's obnoxious, and I was just so insecure. And what I thought was the greatest blessing of my life was actually just the greatest crutch for my insecurities. Just these things I called my gifts of performing arts. And so I commented on her page, and which I don't normally do, but she commented on something that I posted. And eventually she was giving me a hard time. I called her pretty, and she said, do you call all girls on Instagram pretty? And I was like, bro, so I DM'd her and I was like, what's your deal? And she's like, I'm just kidding. And I said, where are you from? She said, Oklahoma. I said, oh, I'm never meeting this person in my life ever. which is funny because obviously Linda's my wife now, and I live in Oklahoma.
Whoa!
But a year later, she took a vacation to New York City with her family and asked me if I would show them around. And it was a different time then. I feel like now people are cool just meeting strangers that they meet online. Like that's just normal. That was not as normal back then. I think Tinder just started. Like that whole concept was so new, and not as regular for people. So I did meet her in person in New York and just head over heels. And she was telling me about Jesus. And I was like, yeah, I'm not sure if that's for me. Cool if you're into that, but not really a religious person, not really into church or all that. Well, why not? And so this started a bunch of questions. Took 2 more days off of work just to spend time with Linda. And eventually we did long distance. And every time I would go visit, I would ask her questions about the Bible. If God is real, why does this happen? If God is good, like why do these kinds of things happen? She just answered all of them really well. And it came to the point, it just all sounded too good to be true. This Jesus stuff and all this God stuff. And then it came to the point where I was like, if God's real, if all this is real, why would this person named Jesus, why would he have done any of that for me? And she said, because he loves you. And so I wanted to believe it was real, but I still couldn't see it, still couldn't believe it. And she told me, well, why don't you pray? And I did, and nothing happened. But a few days later, so in my early 20s, I used to have really bad panic attacks that were happening semi-regularly. And one day I felt like I was having a panic attack at work. And so I went to the bathroom and I was like, I'm going to sit here for 2 minutes and my panic attack will be over. I don't know if you guys ever had a panic attack before. Basically, it just feels like you're dying for like a brief amount of time, but it's terrible. And so I was used to it. I was like, I'll just chill out for a few minutes and it'll just go away. Well, in this particular time, my heart started to slow back down and I started to feel really warm. And this voice, I don't know, it's hard to explain. And not so much I heard it or felt it, but it said, I did not create you for fame and glory. I created you to have a relationship with you. I created you to love you and to share that love with others. And I didn't believe in God. But at the same time, I was thinking, that's God talking to me. So I thought I was losing my mind. Like this was not the voice in my head. This was someone who was not me. And all of a sudden I saw these images of me singing in churches, me telling people about Jesus, me encouraging young people through the Bible and through prayer, feeding the homeless, really things that were no serious concerns for my life. I wanted nothing to do with church or religion or Jesus. That's all I wanted in that moment. And I made a decision in that bathroom to follow Jesus for the rest of my life. I felt so whole in that moment when God was talking to me in that private bathroom in that gym. And he said, follow me. And when I left that bathroom, it was like, have you guys seen The Wizard of Oz before?
Yeah.
You haven't seen The Wizard of Oz?
Yes.
Okay,
You've got to see
The
this.
Wizard of Oz is the first color movie ever. And the movie starts in black and white. And when she's in Kansas, like, a tornado sweeps her house up. And then when the house lands, she opens the door in Oz and everything's in color. It's really beautiful. It's a really good, yeah, sorry. But that is the best way I can explain it. When I opened the bathroom, it was like I saw everything for the first time, how it was supposed to be seen. And Linda will ask, like, was that not just the best day of your life? And I said, well, it feels more like the first day of my life. And I left my acting career that me and my family spent so much time and money towards, and we all had this dream together. But I knew I would be chasing something that came so short to what I experienced in that bathroom, and which was a person named Jesus. And so, yeah, I quit my acting career. I left a very prestigious agency, which a lot of celebrities are in the same agency. So I was, if there was a peak I was moving towards, I was there. I was auditioning against celebrities for movies and TV shows. And like I said, I spent everything in it, but I could not deny that Jesus was real. And what he wanted for me was so much different from what I was chasing my whole life. And I moved to Oklahoma a year later just to help Linda with her youth ministry. I didn't know what I was doing. That was in 2016. And then I just started volunteering at my church, helping Linda with the youth group. And she's still the youth pastor there after 9 years in February of 2024. And then I became the worship pastor just because they needed help there. And I felt like I wasn't leading and helping people well because I feel like I didn't understand the Bible enough. I didn't understand how to lead church enough. So I originally was going to Oklahoma State University to get a degree in occupational therapy. Doing ministry did not sound good full time because I'm like, I'll have no money. It seems really hard. If I should not be a pastor, like I am an adult and just like started following Jesus, like someone else should do that. But could not help but feel God calling me to that. So I transferred to Mid-America Christian University and started out as a worship and music major, but changed it to ministry leadership to learn more about the Bible. And then my last day of classes, I hugged my campus pastor, Matt Cossey, and he was such a big impact in my life. And he looked at me and said, you'd be a really good campus pastor, but obviously I work here. So I said, thanks, Matt. And then in December 2021, he said he stepped down from being campus pastor. And I was like, what? And he said, and I told him they should hire you. I was like, what? And yeah, why? And I just didn't feel like, I didn't feel like I was equipped or experienced enough to do anything like that. But I prayed for a really long time, but mostly avoiding it most of the time because I don't know. I was really comfortable where I was and really afraid. And then Mac, you called me and said like you were referred to us, and I said, well, I've been praying about it. I really wasn't praying about it as much as I should have. But after that phone call, I prayed a lot, and I asked God to open doors only He can open, and to close doors only He can close. And I said, if this is not where you want me to be, do not let me have this job. But we're here. So I'm sorry, it's such a long story, but I felt like it was necessary to understand like where I come from and who I am and all that.
We appreciate you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I'm glad to get to know you more about that. Get to know you more myself.
Did you know any of the acting stuff?
I had no clue about that.
Okay.
You spoke to me off camera and off recording about you coming to MacU as a pastor, but not about your acting and getting up there.
Yeah, man. So, I was 22 when I started following Jesus. It's pretty crazy. So people assume like I come from like a line of pastors in my family. Like, no, I'm like the first Jesus follower. No, second.
First gen.
Apparently, my grandma was like on fire for Jesus, but she passed away when I was really young, so I didn't really get to experience any of that. But I mean, in my immediate family and kind of the extensions of my family, first follower of Jesus.
That's amazing.
Thanks.
Now we've gathered some questions from Google about faith. We took 7 out of 100 questions about faith. One of the top questions was?
The first one would be, what is a song that has impacted your faith?
I think the song that really, so I did grow up going to a Catholic church. That was kind of just the thing you did in the area I grew up in New Jersey. And I was used to just like Catholic hymns. And I didn't know Christian music sounded anything other than that. And Linda showed me the song Oceans by Hillsong.
Oh, that's cool.
And oh my gosh, it was so impactful and it was so encouraging. And I didn't know Christian music could sound like that. And I mean, I would choose that one. I'm sure a lot of people would agree and probably say that one.
Second question is, who has had the biggest impact on your faith?
I probably just keep bringing her up. My wife, Linda. I mean, she led me to Jesus. But she has, everyone can take a lesson, whoever has like friends or family who have non-believers in their lives. She was just she's never judged me. She prayed for me. She showed me so much grace and love and kindness and the boundaries in what she believed. And obviously that was huge for me.
That's good.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
What misconceptions are there about faith?
A lot. I mean, when you guys think of that question, like, what do you mean by faith? You think when you guys are thinking about people asking me that question?
Well, this question specifically, like faith in God.
In like the Bible, like the biblical, like Jesus, that kind of faith.
Yeah.
Okay. What misconceptions are there about faith? There's a lot, in my opinion. And not to sound cynical. So the word faith in Hebrew, well, let's backtrack for a second. When we talk about believing in something, did everyone here believed in Santa Claus at one point in their life?
Yes.
You never? Okay, well.
That got broke up
I
so
was
early for me.
homeschooled.
Like, so
Oh,
early.
yeah. Okay. So how did your parents navigate through that? Because as a PK, did they just say, hey?
So I was homeschooled, so
Yeah.
like I didn't get to see other kids around me.
Oh,
believing in
so you're just
Santa,
completely
and
isolated by the idea of Santa
my
Claus.
dad hated the idea of lying to us, so he just never told us
Oh.
about Santa.
Yeah. No, I feel that. I was just curious. Well, okay. So this is not a question for you then. So for those of you guys who did believe in Santa Claus, like, do you feel like that impacted your behavior?
Yeah.
How?
So I feel like whenever I believed in Santa,
Yeah.
I always like felt like there was something that there was like, I don't know, felt like I was believing in something that wasn't there, but I knew it was there. Just like it ties into like faith.
Mm-hmm.
In a
Well,
way.
yeah, because like, when children believe in Santa Claus, they act good around November, right? So they don't get on the naughty list. They, when I was a kid, we put out reindeer food, which is like oats and glitter, I think. And like basically, you follow these. You did something. Your basically your beliefs dictate your behavior. When you believe in something, you put stock into something because of this expectation you have out of it. When people say they believe in God, it doesn't seem to be the same. Or even if someone was, and I'm not condoning it, this is just a good example. When someone bets on something, like a horse, you put money towards the horse you believe in.
Yeah.
Right? That's common sense. So with faith, believing in God is basically trusting and basically you're investing who you are, what you have into God. When you say, I believe in God, when people say, I believe in God, sometimes they're just saying, I believe in the existence of a higher power. But by definition, you're not believing in God. You're just acknowledging that something is real. And so with faith, the Hebrew word for faith, to go back to that, literally means to fall backwards for someone to catch you.
Oh, wow.
And so when you think of faith like that, a lot of people who go to church or say that they're a Christian, it may ask, like, when someone says, yeah, I'm a Christian, I would usually say, well, I'm actually more curious, what does your dependence on Jesus look like? What does your dependence on God's provision look like in your life? How do you make decisions based on the Lord's guidance? And so I feel like faith, the greatest misconception is that it's just this like ethical code where like you follow these rules that church people tell you to follow or don't follow. And if you don't, then you're a sinner and we feel better about our sin and can judge you for yours. And it becomes, there's a word for it called legalism, where there's this gigantic emphasis on rules as opposed to faith. But we talked about faith falling backwards for someone to catch you. Faith is relational, not rule-centered. And so and it looks like, from just the questions you guys have prepared, rules for the boundaries of the goodness of your life is different from, well, a church person said it, so I should do it. But we can dive into that in a little bit. Does that make sense? Is that a good misconception about faith? That it's not just like rules, but it is like you are depending on something. That's what the word faith means.
That's actually very huge to
And so-
society. I've seen that in my own life when I
Yeah.
was first getting into it.
Yeah.
So
And
I appreciate
so,
that.
yeah, of course. And so if a lot of people think like the opposite of faith is disbelief. That's how a lot of us would think of it, right? Either you have faith or you're not a believer. But if faith means dependence, then what would the opposite of faith be? Independence, self-reliance, self-building, self-provision. And so there are a lot of people who say they believe in God, but believe in themselves a whole lot more.
Yeah.
And so that would be, in my opinion, the greatest misconception of what faith is, that it's dependence.
Yeah.
Slay.
I feel like there's a lot of people who believe in like that there's a one-side view of religion nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
To where it's just like they only believe in what the church has presented to them and not what the Bible has stated.
And Dr. Sutton, who's a professor here, he dives into this concept called dogma, doctrine, or personal belief and conviction. There are 3 levels of basically how we perceive truth and information. There is dogma, which is like this essential truth that we can all get on board with and believe that, like, when you hold a pencil and drop it, like, we're all in here on the same page, foundational truth that it will fall because of gravity, dogma. Which I probably butchered that definition, but it's basically like it's a measurable truth. Then there's doctrine, where it's like a teaching. So this church, like, let's say they will read some scriptures and create boundaries or expectations based off of understanding that scripture. For instance, it's going to get so controversial, but some people will look at scripture from the Old Testament of the tithes. You may have heard of tithes. It's like giving 10% of your money, and make it a rule for membership at a church. That's doctrine. That's what they believe, a teaching that they do. Now, doctrine literally means teaching. And then there's personal conviction or opinion. What you believe. Like, for me, people ask me as a pastor, am I allowed to listen to non-Christian music if I'm a Christian? And I'm like, number one, I don't care what you're listening to. I do not care. I would ask better questions like, why are you listening to that? Or I'll tell you what I listen to. I would say 98% of the music I listen to is probably like worship music. But not because I feel like I have to. Not because I'm a pastor. It's life-giving to me. I love it. It like puts my mind on who God is, and it puts words in my mouth to sing and pray. And so for me, I love it. That's a personal conviction. It's not a sin to listen to anything else. It's just like, that's me. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember your question. I dove so hard into. Is that helpful? I don't know if that's helpful with like the boundaries thing in the church stuff. Different churches believe different things.
Yeah.
And yeah. I think the sticky part is when we have our personal convictions and treat them like rules for what the Bible says. So, yeah.
Well, that's a really good answer.
Thanks.
How do you like to spend time with God?
I think my favorite way to spend time with God is an ancient discipline in the church called silence and solitude. There is a room in my house where I sit for at least 5 minutes, which I wish it was way more usually. And I say nothing. I listen to nothing. And I'm just present to God, and I just let him love me. And a lot of us are scared of the quiet because of our fears and insecurities and regrets, but it's a time to also bring those to him and kind of wrestle with all that with him. And a lot of that time is spent just listening to what he thinks about me. And sometimes nothing happens, but just being present, taking the very least, I am committing to like, this time is yours, God. But this is the thing. I'm afraid sometimes people can compartmentalize their faith You guys know what I mean when I say that?
Mm-hmm.
This is like my being a Christian time. This is my God time. This is my Jesus time. This is my everything else time.
Like, are you talking about like putting it in by compartmentalize? You mean like putting it in a box?
No, I mean so much more like some people will say like when I come to church, that's like my God time, right? That's my church time. This is when I'm a Christian, but not how I use my phone. That time is like me time. Or does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like there's an example of a guy who used to go to school here and he was a ministry major. And I guess he would get really handsy on dates. And this guy was like training to be a pastor. And this girl said, I thought you were like trying to be a pastor. I thought you were a Christian. He's being really inappropriate. He said, I don't bring Jesus to dates with me. Mm. And so that is compartmentalizing your faith. When your faith becomes like a hat you wear and not like it being your life. And so that's why like I'm a little nervous about the question, how do you like to spend time with God? Which I'm just overthinking, but that I like to sit there and just be in the silence and just be present to him. But I really try to do everything with God as best as I can, even things like right now, or when I'm eating, or when I'm listening to music, or talking to people.
What is the difference between being spiritual and being religious?
This is a really loaded question. There's this perception that they're separated and that there's this, have you guys ever heard the phrase false dichotomy before?
No.
A false dichotomy.
Absolutely not.
A false dichotomy is basically when you, it's basically, it has to be this or that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So like, perfect example. People, they found out my ethnicity, and then sometimes people forget. So people will be like, Kevin, aren't you Filipino? And someone said, no, he's Japanese. Like, no, he's Filipino. And I'm like, guys, I'm both. You know what I'm saying? Like they think I'm either one or the other, but that's not the case. So people separate the words religious and spiritual a lot. The perception, I think, for the masses is that they are like so far away from each other on a spectrum. And so, but I think what your average person would think of when they think of the word spiritual is like they think of things that are supernatural, which is very broad. And when someone thinks of religious, they'll think of like rules. Do you guys feel like that is accurate?
Yes.
Okay, well, I mean, what do you guys think of when you think of spiritual and religious?
When I hear the word spiritual, like nowadays, I think of like crystals.
Same.
Like
Astrology.
Incense. Yeah.
Spirituality.
Or like Buddhism.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
See, when I think of being spiritual, that like whenever we're talking about in like a godly sense,
mm-hmm.
it just makes me feel like you're talking more of the actual relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you're talking about religious, it makes me think of churches.
Mm. Well, I think most people would agree with, I feel like a lot of people would feel like that. The word religious literally means devoted, committed, loyal, present. Those sound like really good words, right? We're talking about being religious. Mm-hmm. But over time, people who claim to be followers and representations of Jesus Christ got really legalistic, right? We learned that word today. And kind of gave the word religion kind of a bad taste in people's mouths. Yeah. So Jesus was deeply religious. He worshipped every Saturday as just a devoted Jewish person, and he read from scripture. He was deeply religious and devoted to God and the community of God. And so I don't think that's a bad thing. But he was also spiritual. There's a story in the Gospels where he says that his followers will worship in spirit and in truth. Mm-hmm. And so I think when people think about the difference between being spiritual and being religious is boundaries. Mm-hmm. We live in a culture that is predominantly uncomfortable and has no desire for boundaries. I mean, do you guys feel like that's true, or am I kind of making that up?
No, that is 100%.
Do you feel like that?
Easily.
Okay.
Not even close.
I mean, have you guys felt like you personally don't like boundaries in terms of like what should a kind of lifestyle to live and choices to make? If we were to be honest,
it depends.
Depends. Okay.
On what exactly the boundaries we're discussing.
Okay.
It's just like I feel like certain boundaries shouldn't be, and then there's other boundaries that has to be there in order for life to function right.
Okay. How about you, Preston?
Yeah, I hate boundaries depending on the circumstance, but I also that just might be my rebellious heart.
Well,
So,
what would the circumstance be dependent on? Whether it caters to you?
like a lot, like whenever I don't like it depends on who is giving me the boundaries and like what the scenario is. Because like I understand like Mackew's like rules.
Sure.
Like I understand those boundaries, and then like when I ask my mom if I can go somewhere, she's like, "No." I'm like, "Come on."
Right.
I don't know.
Well, let's talk about boundaries. Like when you read scripture and we see that God is creating boundaries for people. I mean, what do you guys feel about that?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I said like, when God creates boundaries for people in scripture, like what do you feel? How do you feel about that?
Can you give like a specific
Yeah,
scenario?
for sure. God, one of the 10 commandments is that that you shall not do any work on the seventh day. It is a day of rest. It is a commandment. It is a boundary, he says. So like, how do you guys feel about that?
So
I don't know. We don't really put that into practice anymore.
yeah.
Like, I don't know. It's probably a lot to do with like times. I mean, times change and people start not following rules that were set in those times. So I don't know.
Well, if we're making the argument that God set that rule, what do you think?
Well, I also think about like some things I get confused about in the Bible because some things are like part of the Jewish customs.
Okay.
And then some of it was actually Jesus commanding us to do.
I mean, Jesus was Jewish.
Well, yeah, but he also was like he lived in the Jewish culture, so yeah, but there was something that I don't know, now this day and age we don't follow Jewish customs.
What if I told you guys that Christianity is an offshoot of Judaism? Like, Christians would identify with like, we are not like the Israelites, the Jews, they come from the line of Judah. Like it's in your blood. We are not, well, I know I'm not, I don't know about you guys, but like we are not, but we are spiritually a part of God's family. And so we are worshiping the God of Israel, the God of Judah, like Jesus. And so, okay, here's a perfect example. Right now, there's a huge thing about, not right now, it's always happened, but right now, it's popular on social media that like you should be able to do whatever you want in your like dating life. Mm-hmm. Would it be good to do whatever you wanted in terms of like your relationships?
No, the divorce rates would be much higher than they are now.
What else you think? If you just act on what like on simply your urges, do you feel like that would be good?
I feel like it's not good.
Okay. Hookup culture is at an all-time high in the West, and I'm pretty sure the East, but I'm not positive on that. But definitely in the West, because of like in the sense of like, well, it's freedom. I could do whatever I want. Mm-hmm. But as soon as someone says, or no, or maybe you shouldn't, it's like there's like violence against it, or like strong opposition towards it. Yeah. Do you wonder if boundaries are a good thing for you? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, there's a quote I really like by Saint Ignatius of Loyola. He said he defines sin as not trusting that God has in mind your deepest happiness. And unless you trusted that, why wouldn't you try to control every part of your own life? And so the way I look at it is like with Wilder, when he started to learn how to climb. Oh, Wilder's my son. He's 2 years old. When he started to learn how to climb, it was terrifying because I didn't want him to get hurt. So he would try to climb our dining room table all the time. And I would like grab him and put him down and be like, listen, you can't do that. Like I would get onto him, tell him no, like pat his butt, whatever. And one day I looked away for like 15 seconds and he was on top of the table and I got scared. So I said, hey, don't move. And he was so scared of getting in trouble. He just panicked and he fell off the table and he started crying. Wilder didn't understand I created a boundary for him because I had his safety in mind. I had his best interest in mind. That is why I created a boundary. In his mind, he probably thought, Dad's trying to boss me around. And with God, we tend to do the same exact thing. I really like what Preston said. I'm willing to follow the boundary depending on the person setting that boundary. And if you do not trust that God has your best interest in heart, why would you trust his boundaries? Mm-hmm. Why would you trust him at all? And so that's why, like, when people think of religion, I feel like they think of the word boundary, and I don't feel like we have to demonize what that means. In spirituality, God is spirit, and we have a personal relationship with him and a communal relationship with him, with his family. And so I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how I understand that question.
Slay.
Thanks.
So as Christians, we are called to find non-believers and try to show them the gospel, the message, things like that. And you'll find people who are quite, could I say? Quite against, we'll just say quite against God.
Yeah.
So what if someone were to say to you, I don't believe in God? How would you answer that?
What would be the context of the situation? Because it matters.
You are approaching someone to teach them about Jesus, and they
Like
tell you
just a
straight up, I do
random
not believe in God."
non-believer on the street.
Non-believer on the street.
I probably wouldn't do that in the first place. Because how people respond to religion who are non-believers in the first place is they already have this image of what that looks like that a lot of times has been distorted by their experiences. So there's this quote I really like. I want to say it was St. Augustine who said it, but I could definitely be wrong. So if you're listening, you can fact check this. But it's preach the gospel at all times, use words when necessary. And I really love that quote. I'll give you an example. I worked as a server through college. So for 4 years, I've worked in different restaurants. And I don't know if you've ever worked at a restaurant. You don't normally have like a bunch of Jesus pursuing people like flooding the restaurants, becoming chefs and waiters usually. And that's fine, like zero judgment. There was actually, I would get really refreshed. This sounds horrible. I was a Bible student at this Bible college as a training to be a pastor. And then I would work at a Mexican restaurant with a bunch of non-believers. And the authenticity was so refreshing from working with servers who are just completely who they are. And what I did was, and the way I wanted them to be a part of God's family was this: I would sit in my car for a few minutes and pray for them. I pray blessings over their lives. I would say and pray for them by name. And then I would beg God to give me opportunities to talk about him to them. And I walked in there and I tried to be Jesus to other people without ever telling anyone I was a Christian. Not that I was hiding it. Like if people asked, yeah. So I was becoming I was becoming really good friends with a lot of these people. And eventually they would get to know me and they would like me. They would invite me to parties and like want to hang out. I would say no. And they would just ask me like, hey, so like, what's your story, man? Like, you go to college or whatever? Like, yeah, I actually go to Mid-America Christian University. And they're like, oh, what are you studying? It's like, I'm actually training to be a pastor. And they'd be so shocked. They'd be like, you're a Christian? And I'm like, yeah. Why are you asking me like that? Like, you're just not like any Christian like I've met. I was like, what's been your experience? And they said, oh, they're just so judgmental, or they want anything to do with me, or and then they would start just kind of venting to me about a lot of experiences they've had with Christian people. And, working at a restaurant, servers hated Sundays. You'd have a bunch of people who would come eat after church and not tip and be demanding and be rude. And people are more willing to invite you to church than to tip. And so why would they like Christians when you're working at a restaurant? And I'm like, I'm so sorry. And there was this one girl at this restaurant I worked at, and we were super cool. She actually asked this question, Chance. She said, what would you do if someone told you that what you believed in was fake? God's not real. And I said, I'd probably say nothing. And she was so confused by that. She's like, what do you mean? This is like, this is what you believe in. I said, well, this is the thing. If you are just looking to argue and your mind is set on not trusting anything I'm going to say, all you and I are going to do is argue. So why would I start trying to prove that he's real if you already made up your mind that you're not willing to really ask? And her posture changed. And she said, is he real? I said, are you asking me or you want to argue? And she said, I want to know. And she told me her experiences where her father was a deacon of the church. He would sing a lot of songs, and then he would come home and beat her mom and cuss her out. And so she had no respect for him or the church or Christianity. And I said, I'm so sorry that happened. That's not Jesus. And so I got to explain to her about the Bible, about its history, about who Jesus was, about what his heart was, and answer all her questions. And I prayed for her. And then we both stopped working there. I remember one day I was kind of wondering, did I even make an impact or whatever? And she Facebook messaged me about a year later of a certificate she received from a church she was going to, that she had been baptized. And she said, if you weren't willing to be obedient and show me who God was, I would have never given church another chance. And so I've seen so much more fruit from trusting in God, praying for people, and showing, when I was behind their back and when I was in front of them, showing them who he is through my actions and through my words. That's why a lot of non-believers tend to feel very comfortable talking to me, because I look at them the way God looks at them. They were created to be God's children, and that they didn't have to strive to be something, that God loves them right here, right now, without having to do anything more. The invitation is only to trust that. That's the gospel. And so usually when people tell me they don't believe in God, the question is this something you'd like to talk about? Or you're just telling me, because you have to understand the intent of why people say things. The why matters. If they just want to argue, I ain't trying to do that. I don't want to get violent and be hateful. You know what I'm saying? I've heard a pastor say, don't try to win the argument, try to win the heart. And that's the thing God is after anyway. You can be right and have all the resources and answers, but if you don't do it in a way Jesus did, you're wrong. Jesus invites the rich young ruler to follow him. And when the rich young ruler denies, what does Jesus do? He lets him. So if Jesus let other people walk away, you have to remember that it is a choice people make, not something you convince them of, not something you argue them into. My policy, I try to love people to Jesus. Does that make sense? So I don't know if that answers the question, but that would be, I guess, my approach in those kinds of situations.
I think that gives a lot of insight of how to go about something like that. I think a lot of Christians have struggled to be able to do that properly, and I think that's somewhat of a blueprint to do it.
Well, I think what's helpful is I wasn't a Christian for most of my life. And I remember looking back, people I'll never get to talk to again because they're strangers, who were Christians, who invited me to church, who would tell me they would pray for me, who were so kind, that made me question a lot of the Christians I didn't like. Those are the real heroes. So people just being faithful and obedient, not like you don't have to be a pastor to do that. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not saying I'm doing it the right way. That's just how I do it. I'm a pretty young Christian still, and I'm not saying I have all the right answers, but that is where my heart is led to lead others to Jesus.
Okay. I'm glad for you to teach me that. I'm definitely something that I'm wanting to learn myself,
Sure.
to how to approach that kind of conversation with someone who's a non-believer. Typically, I would actually find out the why, but I think the way you went about it is probably much better and more, if you want to go mathematical about it, efficient.
Well, this is the thing. I had this like kind of thought recently. A lot of people, their disbelief, they will say it's due to like evidence. That's what it always comes down to. Well, if God's real, how to explain this? But here's the thing. People don't make decisions based on evidence because people make bad decisions based on evidence that they're bad for you. Cigarettes, drinking too much alcohol. There's literally, these companies will help support research that will tell you those things are bad for you, right? But yet people still do it. So if evidence can't sway you to not do something bad, why would evidence sway you to do something good? It's all about whether you want to or not. And so you have to ask yourself, is the reason why someone's not following Jesus an emotional reason or an intellectual reason? If it's an intellectual reason, let's sit down here and talk about it. Let's talk about whether the New Testament can be measured up with other historical documents. Let's talk about all that stuff. But if there's some sort of reason outside of that, you have to be sensitive to that. So
I appreciate that. Now we got one final question before we close out the show. And this is something I wanted to ask you personally. How has God in your life moved this past week?
Actually, something pretty awesome happened here recently. And he's always moving in my life. I feel like, for instance, just this morning, just listening to kind of just instrumental music and just talking to him, that's God moving in my life. But on Friday, I launched a young adult service on campus called Together Night, and I didn't know what to expect. I was the team that was helping me launch this and lead this. I told them it could just be us. No one may show up, but that's okay. This is what God put in our hearts. Let's be faithful. Maybe one person shows up. This is for them, and I preached, and this is something I feel like may make me look probably more human and approachable to people, because when you're a pastor, apparently you're less those things. It is very hard for me to preach in front of a big crowd. Not because I'm nervous of like getting in front of big crowds. Told you I was a professional performing artist. That doesn't bother me.
Weird flex.
Well, listen though, for 10 years training at a high level, and you know what I'm saying? I was a professional. So why would I get nervous? It was what I did. So it's not the crowds that get me nervous, but there's a voice in my head a lot of times when I preach saying, you shouldn't be doing this. You're bad at this. No one cares. No one's listening. Stop. Shorten this up. People are bored. I hear that a lot when I'm preaching. And I remember I wasn't sure how people were responding to the message, which, by the way, is none of anyone's business. That's just between the people listening and God. I believe that, yet I was still struggling to believe that in the moment when I was preaching. And a part of me was like, should I have even done any of this? Whatever. I walked off stage and I prayed. And I heard God say, surrender your expectations. That was so freeing, because God is only inviting you to be faithful. He is not saying do this and be successful. He is saying be faithful. And so that was so freeing. I showed up, I did what he asked me to do, and I left it. And apparently after service, I found out this kind of thing on campus was something a lot of people were wanting. We had over 140 people scan in for this, and about 40 people outside of MacU come to be a part of it. And they all said, like, thank you for doing this. This is something I've been looking for. This is something I've been wanting. I really feel like I have a place. I really feel like I have community. And I was just so overwhelmed, you know? And, like, the fact that God would even use me is ridiculous. Like, you know, I told you guys my story. I was not a believer. I'm not secretive about it. Like, I mean, before I was a Christian, I was partying all the time. I was getting drunk. I was getting high. I was sleeping around, like, so broken. And how God would use someone who's so insanely imperfect to be an avenue to lead others to Jesus is beyond me. And so I was just humbled by that. And it was just so moved that I could serve other people in this way and give them a space to wrestle with God and to pray. So, but yeah. But, you know, we shouldn't be chasing highs as Christians. Like, God is always moving in my life. We should really be seeking God in the mundane, the drive to the store, interactions with your friends, when I'm talking and sitting with my wife, Linda, when I'm playing with Wilder, understanding that this is all, like, beautiful and God has blessed me with this. The fact that I could even be in a podcast studio is like, wow, the kind of resources. Most Americans are 75%, we're on the top 75% wealthiest in the whole world. And in our pursuit of wanting more, doing more, making more money, getting more attention, having more influence, we forget that we are so blessed and God is so present in our lives, you know? So, yeah.
Oh, this was amazing to hear. I appreciate you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh, well.
So,
For anyone who'll listen, I'll talk.
thank you so much for being here. I do appreciate that. So, appreciate Sarah Ford, Preston Broderick for coming on to the show with us.
Thank you, guys.
No problem.
Y'all are good
My name
sports.
is Chance Williams. You can check us out, all our social medias, and down in the description below. Check out Kevin. He's launching a podcast soon. Make sure to go show him some love, send him a follow, all that good stuff over there. I'm waiting for that episode too. So
For my podcast?
yeah.
Oh, so the podcast is called Young Adulting with Jesus. And the first episode is about what am I doing with my life? Which I feel like is a question young adults are wrestling with always. So
Yeah.
it's going to be fun. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be, we'll see.
You guys should find that in a link down in the description below. So you guys go send some love over there. And for the viewers over on YouTube, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, comment down below what you think of the episode, comment any questions you want. We also have a Gmail that we set up. You'll find that out down in the description as well, where you can send in any questions, anybody you want to bring on for a episode. Thank you, and have a good time.
Slay.
But